Ni mimi nimvuta kazi ama ni yeye alijivuta kazi? Sasa wewe ni waziri, baraza la mawaziri umeigomea. What am I supposed to do? I gave my good friend Justin a chance, a second chance, but in the process, he dismissed himself.
But I dare say this, if the intention was to silence me, unfortunately, they have dialed the wrong number.
Wow, okay. So, again, a few unprecedented things that happened there. The president speaking to Kikuyu speaking media.
No, Mount Kenya.
Mount Kenya.
Mount Kenya speaking media.
Yeah, there are some that speak in Kiembu,
okay.
Some in Kimeru.
Okay.
Yeah, so they broadcast to the communities in Mount Kenya.
The communities in Mount Kenya.
Yep.
Because the communities in Mount Kenya are many. They are not
yep.
just the Kikuyu. Okay. Interesting that the president chooses to subject himself to something like this before the tour. Isn't it interesting, guys, that he goes on television and defends himself, and something about all of this, including that interview, felt like a candidate, not a president. So I'm here and I'm going to say this and I'm going to defend myself, and there was this that happened and then this that happened. Because interestingly, what he does with that is to open himself up to responses, which is what we saw from J.B. Muturi afterwards. And of course, others, including, I think we saw a post from the former deputy president. But that was an interesting one because it was wide-ranging. He talked about J.B. Muturi, he talked about the former deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, and of course, his gave us a scorecard of his performance. But Sam, that was an interesting interview for the Mount Kenya nation.
Right, and I think the president was spot on the agenda why he called that interview, because you'll actually see, when you sit down and watch it, you'll actually see he had an agenda for it. So there were, how many journalists that were asking the questions? They were close to 10.
Yeah.
7.
9.
Okay. 9
close to 10 is
9 is close to 10.
Is as accurate as it gets.
Yeah, so they were asking questions, and you could see everyone was eager, because the last time the president spoke in an interview, he spoke to one of us here.
Yes.
And 2 others. I don't want to repeat the name because I think I remember it.
Unaogopa nini?
So he's been quiet. No, you know it. He's been quiet for a very long time.
Yes.
So there are many pending questions that Kenyans were waiting to hear answers for. And the president knew it. But how about he's asked about the agenda for the trip to Mount Kenya, and he's talking about road projects that had been stuck, and he drops a line and says that I have constructed a road, I'm working on the road that passes through Amunyoro, so that person who has been fighting me.
I built a road to his doorstep.
Exactly, and then he laughs, and of course the team of journalists takes cue. That is what the president wanted to address, that yes, the impeachment happened, but mimi sikuwa na ubaya, these are the reasons. He actually exonerated himself from any blame of why Rigathi Gachagua today does not live at the official residence of the deputy president. And he said that he had nothing to do with it. He said that members of parliament are the ones who were agitated, aggrieved with the former deputy president, and he tried to call them for a meeting to sort of ask them not to do what they were planning to do, but they could hear none of it. But of course, when you speak to members of parliament, that is contrary to what has been the situation. You'll hear members of parliament telling you that they were actually called directly on instructions that they needed to put into consideration. You'd actually see the interest of the president in this particular removal from office.
The deputy speaker?
Yeah, Gladys Boss.
Of the National Assembly also said something to
that is Gladys Boss,
yes.
said that she was serving what the president wanted. As you process that, remember, shortly after the Senate was done with impeaching Rigathi Gachagua, what happened the following day? There was a communication. In fact, there was a gazette notice from the Senate. The following day, there was a name to the National Assembly. So if indeed the president was not keen on having Rigathi Gachagua impeached, How then do you explain the efficiency in communicating a new name of a deputy president, replete with confirmation from the IEBC of what exactly had transpired, that's saying he's actually fit to be elected as deputy president? And you know, for you to be elected deputy president, you need to qualify to be elected as president. And for you to qualify to be elected as president, you need to qualify to be a member of parliament. So the events, the facts of what was happening go contrary to what the president was saying. But leave that aside. When you listen to him explaining the situation to do with this trip that was coming on board, he's also speaking about Justin Muturi, a person that he had just fired. And then he says something that on the question of abductions, because people are asking, okay, the former speaker, the former cabinet secretary is complaining that the cabinet has not addressed the situation with abductions. Yeah. And he goes ahead and says that the cabinet has already taken a position on abductions. The president, quoting himself, has already taken a position on abductions. Then you find the following day, the former cabinet secretary issues a statement and says that he was invited to 3 meetings of the cabinet. The agenda had been outlined. None of that agenda was on abductions. And that he receives communication from the cabinet post the meeting. This is the dispatch of the meetings. And indeed, as a newsroom, we've also been receiving dispatches from the cabinet on the proceedings and the concessions that were arrived at. In none of those do you see any word that abductions were discussed. So for the president to say that the cabinet took a position and he himself has taken a position, but one of his cabinet secretaries or former cabinet secretaries has no notice of that, the dispatches from the cabinet do not say anything about abductions. Yeah. Is it that, and he says that the police officers are supposed to now take responsibility over this. So where did that communication come from? Right. What is the truth about the facts of the matter?
Let's listen to J.B. Muturi.
Inference one draws from my sacking is that raising the issue of abductions and extrajudicial killings must be terribly annoying to the president. It is no wonder that those closest to the president have variously been in different fora calling for my resignation and or sacking.
All right, and he continued to say the same thing, laying this at the doorstep of the president.
I asked the question, why has the president not given the names of those killers that were part of that squad so that they can be prosecuted for the crimes they have committed? Your guess is as good as mine. When my son was abducted, all efforts to trace him and get him released from the various security agencies in the country proved futile until when I went to the president himself and he called the Director General of the National Intelligence Service. Then my son was promptly released.
Yeah, I'll come to you, Jamila, in a moment, regarding now what he said about his now former deputy president. But Jay, it's interesting that now this is where we are in the country, where the president says one thing and there's rebuttals and, nikujibizana. I remember a time, even in perhaps pre-2010, when there was a certain level or standard of the presidency that was above the fray and above the noise and above the back and forth, particularly even with people who he has fired. But it somehow seems that he finds himself in these positions or perhaps puts himself there. And that's exactly what an interview like this does. It exposes him to that sort of thing where it's no longer, high level, but it's, let's get into the fray, let's roll up our sleeves and, get down and dirty.
And I think this happens a lot for William Ruto, that as president, I think he's had a number of people talk back at him. That is something that in the previous dispensations we'd not seen. And that would beg the question, why are they doing that? What exactly do they know that gives them this courage and that they're able to take the president what you'd call mundu humundu? And in public. I think that also needs for some reflection. You might want to say that it's freedom of speech and expression. Yeah. Yes, but the seat of the presidency still needs to have some level of respect. I also think that if we go back to the interview that William Ruto did with the radio stations from Mount Kenya region, basically what he was doing is a good old proverb that says, not a proverb, that idiom that says that he who has a bad name is half hanged. So he goes there and justifies all the moves he'd made on Rigathi Gachagua and JB Muturi, knowing that it will cement or it will win some of the audiences to try and bring them back to his side. Because look at the things he says about them. One, I tried helping this guy, but he did not. It's the MPs themselves who decided it was too much. And why did the MPs decide? He wanted them to bow down before him and all that. All the characters of a bad leader and of a dictator. So he's already saying that your guy, I liked him, but his character and mannerism was not for the day. The same thing he says about JB. I gave him a job, but he decided to fire himself. So I think the president is opening himself up to more of this, and we'll definitely see them to the run-up to the next elections. Because, like JB says, that if they thought they wanted to silence him, they dialed the wrong number. But a quick tip to JB, I think he needs now to get into action. He's said all this a number of times. And us watching from the sidelines, sometimes high-octane politics is what keeps us on edge. He should be done talking. Let's see some of these things that he has promised. And I would advise him, if he's not supposed to write a book because of Official Secrecy Act, then at least he can have somebody say some of these things on his behalf.
Secret?
Oh, there's no secret.
People don't keep secret.
They don't keep secret. Yeah. Because he seems like he's bottling a lot. He really wants to say stuff, but he's very reserved. At what point will he do it? Because the president has gone full throttle and he's pressing on the gas against them. So this kind of reserved kid's glove approach might not do him justice. He needs to go all out. It's man to man.
Mundo hu mundo.
Mundo hu mundo.
Mundo hu mundo. Come on now.
Yeah,
well, there is set to be a by-election in his constituency.
Maybe that would set the stage.
Maybe he'll throw his hat in the ring. Maybe it'll be somebody else. Maybe somebody else closer to him. Who knows? But you know, just like you're saying, go head on. The former deputy president seems to be doing exactly that.
Alitajwa sana at the Sagana meeting. I think we would call it, the president opened up a bit on the intrigues that led to the impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua. And he started talking about how alianza kuwa na shida na kesi na kila mtu. I don't know if we have that bite. Let's listen to the president saying alianza kuwa na shida na kila mtu.
Sasa ikanifikia mimi. Mimi sasa. Unajua, mimi naweza kukufanya one-term president. Usipofanya hii, usipofanya hii, usipofanya hii, nahitaji bilioni 10. Wewe unajua bilioni 10, Bwana Waweru?
Labda zilikuwa za nini rais? Bilioni
10 ndio niende niongee na watu ya Mlimani, you know, ni kupangie siasa, sijui nifanye nini. Mimi nikaona hapa nikamwambia I will not do it. Wacha nimalize. So nikamwambia hii haiwezekani. Na kama ni kuwa one term ni sawa. Hakuna problem.
So the president said Rigathi alitaka 10 billion, and then the one term president thing that he said. But I remember in February, Gachagua said that the president offered him 2 billion to resign as a deputy. And then, of course, he tweeted just after that interview and described the Rais Hasemi Ukweli. And I remember he said the greatest existential threat to our beloved country is outright lying to the people of Kenya without blinking, and failure by a leader to put his team together to harmonize their lives. I weep for my country. That's what Rigathi Gachagua said. And I think what this has done Yvonne and team, is that it's actually shown that there was some money that was exchanged hands. We just don't know
how much.
How much. So it's two people who disagreed on the amount.
Yeah.
So we alisema 2 million, billion, amesema 10 billion. There was somewhere that was written 6 billion, I remember.
Yes.
So it shows us that kuna pesa ambazo
there were some billions.
Kuna billions.
We're just not sure.
We're just not sure. And this reminds me of, let me look at the exact date, July 27, 2022, before the general elections. The then Jubilee Secretary General Raphael Tuju said President Uhuru Kenyatta had paid Dr. Ruto for his backing in the 2013 contest. Akasema walisikizana. And then he was asked, so how much money was given? And he said in billions.
Yes.
I can't say how much, but this amount was in billions. So Yvonne, what this thing has shown us is that kwamba ukweli kuna hela. Because we've had claims.
Tuju said that here.
Alikuwa hapa kwa interview.
Yes, with Jeff.
With Jeff
Koinange,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So what this has shown us is that it's true, because we've had instances in the past where I said money has been exchanged for bills to be passed, money has been exchanged for this to be done, money has been exchanged for that to be done. So basically what these two gentlemen have told us is that kuna pesa ambazo zilitolewa, lakini ni kiasi tu ambayo hatujasikilizana. Yeah. And it was really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, and I find that interesting as well, prosecuting, you know, the manner in which he leads, because not only did he talk about the billions of shillings, I want us to listen to him talking about how you know, Rigathi Gachagua had unnecessary fights with other people. I mean, we now, you know, the curtain is pulled back into the leadership that takes place, you know, behind the scenes. And now is when we start to understand, okay, so there was, you know, there was this trouble. I find this interesting because if this were a private corporate company, you would hardly see a CEO and a current deputy and then, you know, becoming a former deputy, even one that you have let go of, that you keep going back to revisit and say, oh, you know, my deputy CEO did this and did that. I can assure you the board of that company would be livid. But it's politics, and so anything goes.
Shida. Kesi. Kila siku kwa kesi. Itumbi. Amesema sijui ameandika nini. Sasa tukafanya kesi kaita Itumbi. Deputy President ameketi hapo, mimi hapa, wewe Deputy President anasema umefanya. Haya, tunamaliza kesi. Next, baada ya wiki moja, Faruk PA, mtu mdogo, amefanya. Haya, naita Faruk, amefanya kesi, tukamaliza hiyo. Kidogo Ndindi Nyoro ameitisha mkutano sijui Kiharu, amepanga wabunge wengi, mbona amepanga wabunge, mbona, naita Ndindi Nyoro. Tumeketi chini, kesi. Haya, kuisha hiyo, Kimani Ichung'wah, sijui amesema. Sasa mpaka nikamuuliza, ndugu yangu, wewe ni naibu wa rais wa Kenya. Bloga huyu Dennis Itumbi, bloga, unasumbuana na yeye nini? PA ya ofisi mtu kidogo, hawa vijana, you know?
Yeah, so he was frustrated with all of that, and I think to also have been frustrated that the deputy president was not defending government programs. The lamentations went on.
Kazi ya naibu wa rais kuprofile kazi ya serikali. Na wauliza nyinyi, KTN, Citizen, NTV, mulimuona Rigathi ameenda kuongea barabara siku moja, sitima siku moja, program ya UHC one day? What? For 2 years he never stepped in any station kusema program ya, wacha hata station, hata in public kuongea mambo ya serikali.
So we have talked about this several times before, that the president seems very frustrated with one of the persons that he has appointed, but not frustrated enough to want to kick him out. So remember earlier he said that he didn't want to impeach the deputy president at the time. It was the MPs who decided, but yet he had all these frustrations. Again, similar to what he did with JB Muturi, right? That he was incompetent and he didn't pass this and he didn't do that and he didn't give the right advice. But then he still went on to appoint him as cabinet secretary for public service. Interestingly, every time the president speaks, he seems helpless with the people that he appointed. He seems frustrated with the people that he appointed. What's going on? What's happening in there? And this is, again, giving us an inner... We're looking into the inner sanctum of how this works. It would seem that the president is quite frustrated with a number of the people that he himself appointed. And again, I mean, I know I raised this last week on the show. You know, the needle always points true north, doesn't it? Whichever way you perceive north to be. But, you know, this is, yes, I'm frustrated. But then, by the way, didn't we not see this with President Uhuru Kenyatta? Nifanye nini jamani? Yeah. I mean, Jay, surely.
It speaks to the structure of that leadership. And that is why he keeps his frustration therein. But again, one of the most important questions somebody would want to ask, why would people approach the president with such petty cases? Who opens the door to the president with such petty cases? It means the door is always open for them.
Are you calling bloggers petty?
Careful now.
The cases.
The accusations.
The cases.
The accusations. Yes.
The cases
They're petty.
Are petty, yeah.
As a
Yeah, so it's
president.
Mr. President, nani alinichokoza alafu akaniambia.
Na unaweka kesi, unatatua.
Lakini pia nani? Lakini hata jana Jamila alini.
Look, the risk here, and it's a risk that is running. It's actually persistent in this administration, is that of demeaning the office of the president. It becomes really small in many, many ways because of the nature of issues it's handling, because of the nature of complaints it's entertaining. This should never, even in an interview, and I don't really qualify that as an interview, that was more of a press conference that we had. It should be, there are things that the president will stay knowing alone, and these are some of those things. What is also looking not positive for this presidency is when the president talks so much, says a lot about the people he's already dismissed. This is unprecedented. You don't get into a discussion with a former cabinet secretary because the balance of power is also not there. So why are you entertaining a back and forth with Justin Muturi? Why entertain a back and forth with Rigathi Gachagua? And I don't know whether there is a presidential guidebook that stays in the State House, Nairobi, because that position has so far been only occupied by 5 Kenyans. It's a position of high privilege. And a position like that, the culture is developed and passed on from one person to another. This is only number 5. Only number 5. And luckily he's got a number 4 to maybe even consult, because there are certain things which that office should not be about. And this is very strange that you have the president and the people that are junior to him having this kind of conversations. The one with Muturi is going on for quite long. I know now there may be a pushback that, oh, these questions were asked by you, the media. There are many questions that media asks that are not answered. This should have been one of those that don't need an answer. If Muturi is been dismissed by the president, the reasons, really, there's no public pressure for the nitty-gritty of he was incompetent. And by the way, I've never seen any other president calling his former minister incompetent. And there have been a lot of incompetent cabinet secretaries and ministers who have been fired, but without a single word of bad-mouthing the person. At best, that is quite unprecedented.
Yeah, and you already fired him. Shouldn't that speak for itself?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't fire somebody who's competent. So the meaning is implied by the action. But we want to close. But first,